Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's fireside chat. I'm Captain Donald Nisbet, call sign Biscuit, United States Navy retired, and I want to thank you for joining us. NNOA veterans offer a plethora of nonprofit, profit, government, entrepreneur, and academia work employment experiences, and we volunteer to share our advice and offer support to NNOA members facing transition. We're fortunate to have senior executives from a variety of professional backgrounds who have volunteered their time to share their transition experiences to contribute to your successful transition. The NNOA TAT provides this unique opportunity to introduce lessons learned in the form of these fireside chat webinars. Tonight, we're honored to have Captain James Wyatt, United States Navy retired, who's the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for Spartan. He's responsible for leading strategy, business development, and marketing teams focused on customer relations, business opportunities, and strategic growth. Spartan is the leading supplier of sonobuoys and undersea warfare capabilities to the United States Navy and its international partners. Prior to Spartan, Captain Wyatt worked at Raytheon Corporation as a member of the U.S. Business Development for the Navy and Marine Corps team. And prior to Raytheon, Captain Wyatt served in the Navy as a P-3 Naval Flight Officer for over 30 years. He commanded Patrol Squadron 9 and was Commodore of Patrol and Reconnaissance Wing 57. He has served in multiple staffs, including Commander, Patrol and Reconnaissance Force Pacific N1 and N35, Commander, Patrol and Reconnaissance Wing 2, N35, and Commander Pacific Fleet as Deputy EA and EA, and also the Joint Staff J39, and then OpNav and Deputy OpNav and Deputy Director for the Navy staff. He holds a Bachelor's of Science from Florida Agriculture and Mechanical University, a Master's of Business Administration from Troy State University in Montgomery, and he's also a graduate of the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business Executive Leadership Program. I'm honored to introduce to you Captain James Wyatt, United States Navy, retired.
Hey, thanks, Biscuit. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion, and I'm hopeful that it will be a discussion. Biscuit has given me some guidelines to follow here. One is to talk a little bit about my background, to talk about the lessons learned or the tips that I learned that were helpful for my transition, to talk about my transition. And I think I'm fortunate that I've had two transitions since I left the Navy. One was into aerospace and defense at Raytheon, and then the other was into my current position, which is at a much smaller company, also in aerospace and defense, but also in business development, but a different type of job. So I'll follow that format as much as I can. Along the way, I'll talk about some lessons learned, but I don't want to just transmit. I would prefer to have a dialogue, and hopefully you will help me with that. So feel free to ask questions at any time as I go through my little spiel here. So a little bit about me. Biscuit gave you my, my Navy background. A little bit more to that is I joined the Navy right out of high school at 18 years old, and I was an air traffic controller for a while. And then I was privileged to go through the enlisted commissioning program and commission as a naval flight officer. I think perhaps if I were to characterize my career, it would be it's a lot of luck, timing, some performance, but I think the most impactful thing for my career has been the relationships that I have managed. And I say managed because when you think about mentorship, sponsorship, or friendship, throughout our careers, it has to be managed. It's not like we see in sometimes where you get a phone call, you haven't heard from a person in months or years, and then there's a request for help. I think that if you want to have meaningful relationships, whether we're talking about you as a mentee or you as a mentor or you as a sponsor or someone is sponsoring you, you have to manage those relationships. And I was fortunate enough to see, to work for some folks that were great at managing those relationships, reaching out to folks that they mentor to keep that relationship going so that you can kind of, reduce the opportunity for those, those calls where you're in desperate need. So you track them all the way through. And that was a lesson that I learned early, primarily because my first mentor. So when I started the Fleet Replacement Squadron there in Jacksonville, Florida, this for those of you that are non-aviators, that's the training squadron for your first aircraft. So we show up there and they try to pair you. I was as a first tour guy, they try to pair you with the department heads that are coming back for their department head tours. I was fortunate to get paired with a guy that looked like me. In fact, we were probably the only two guys that looked like us in the entire training circle there. I'm talking about instructors, I'm talking about students. And that guy happened to be Andy Wins. Andy Wins was returning for his department head tour. We were both going to the same squadron, so we were paired up together as we were going through the Fleet Replacement Squadron. I could not have asked for a better mentor. In fact, I have leaned on retired Vice Admiral Wins throughout my entire career at almost every decision point and almost every major milestone and beyond my Navy career. He's in the aerospace or he recently retired from the aerospace and defense industry as well. And he was someone that I leaned on as I was making my transition. So I cannot overemphasize how important relationships are in managing those relationships. I think that's probably the most impactful factor for my career, both in the Navy and outside of the Navy. So Biscuit talked about some of the other tours that I've had, and I'm going to throw out some names, not to name drop, but to, later on, I'll illustrate how, managing those relationships were important for me, even through my transition. As I was the EA for, I'm sorry, there's an open mic. If you could mute your mic, that would be great. So I was the executive assistant to Admiral Haney, Cecil Haney. I was also the executive assistant for Harry Harris. I was the deputy to Scott Swift, and also to Frank Caldwell, to Robert Thomas. I served with Bruce Grooms. I served with Rick Hunt. And so all of these folks that I had some type of relationship with were impactful for me as I went through the transition. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to transition. One thing that I tried to do when I was in uniform was to do the same thing for those that I noticed didn't have the same level of mentorship that I had, to those that picked me up and mentored me. And I still do that. And one of the ways that I tried to do that was not just those that were junior to me, but it was those that were peers to me as well. And throughout my transition, though my peers who have retired and transitioned sooner than I have, or even transitioned after I have leaned on them as well. And that too is an important relationship, I think, to maintain. One of the keys to my success, at least. I served for, Biscuit said I served for over 30 years. It turned out to be almost 39 years, counting my enlisted time as well. One of the things that I did, I went from hard job to hard job to hard job. There, after my 06 command tour, I went to the EA job, served 2 tours as the EA, or served two admirals as the EA. Then I went to the deputy director of the Navy staff job, which was, one of those jobs as well. So I was keeping what you would call Navy half days. So those are, as we all know, those are generally kind of 12-hour minimum days, and and stayed in those jobs for a period of 8 out of my last 9 years. I was in one of those type of jobs. So it didn't give me a whole lot of time for preparing myself for the transition. When it became clear, or it was becoming fairly clear to me that I might need to do something there in about my 7th or 8th year, I went to my boss. I was on the Navy staff as the deputy director. I went to my boss, who at the time was Scott Swift, and I said, hey, I think I need to take a little time off. I think I need to go to a transition course, and I need to start preparing myself here for transition. His answer to me was, why haven't you done that already? He said that he had gone through a transition course and prepared for transition, tested the waters on almost at every chance that he had to make a decision on whether he was going to stay or go. And there was no penalty for him doing that. And he said, you're way late to the game. You need to get out there. You need to take a transition course. You need to see what's out there. You need to test the waters. Let's not wait on any board. Let's just see what's out there, and then you can make a decision. So that's another lesson. I think an important tip that I got while I was out there. It's never too early to start looking at transitioning. I think I was way late to the game, but like I said earlier, one of the things that characterized my career, both in and out of the Navy, I think, is luck. So I was fortunate that it did not disadvantage me as much as I think it would have. But as I went through, I didn't go through just one transition course. I went through TAT or ETAP. I went through the MOA transition assistance program as well. I went through the civilian course that was sponsored by Korn Ferry, which, by the way, is a great course. It was over 3 days, I think, starting on a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday. Great course. It was completely facilitated by civilian HR folks, and it was a great course. I would recommend it to anyone. I wouldn't say that there was any one thing in particular, or any one of those courses were much better than the others. I think that there were some jewels in each one of those courses, and I think collectively they prepared me for the transition. Whether we're talking about resume writing, or whether we're talking about interviewing, all of those things were very helpful. I think there's a question there, so I'll pause here for a second. Oh, Biscuit, if you're going to get that.
Oh, I was just putting in a chat to everyone to submit their questions while you're talking.
Okay, got it. So I think that collectively, all of those transition courses prepared me for the next phase, or at least they gave me a sense of what the next phase might look like, and prepared me for certain aspects of the next phase. Towards the end of my career, the last year of my career, I took a position as the professor of naval science and the CEO of the George Washington Consortium, NROTC Consortium there. That was a great opportunity. I got exposed to academia. I got exposed to the administration of 5 different schools. I think I made some pretty good headway in advancing our objectives for growth and for support in all of those different schools. I had a good rapport with all of those folks, and I enjoyed the teaching. That was a great experience. When I signed on for that job, I told my boss, who at the time was Admiral Steve Evans, a good friend of mine, that I was going to be there for 3 years because I had 2 more years before statutory retirement, or 3 years before statutory retirement. So I show up there, and I was fully prepared to stay for the entire 3 years. But while I'm there, and again, here's where relationships matter. I had met I had picked up a mentor along the way through my relationship with Admiral Wins. I worked for Admiral Wins when he was a commander of Patrol and Reconnaissance Force Pacific out in Hawaii. And one of his best friends had come through, and I got a chance to meet him. He was a CO of the Essex. His name was Ron Evans. And from that point on, Ron Evans picked me up as one of his mentees. And great mentor all the way. I learned a lot from Ron, not just when he was in uniform, but also when he went over to industry as well. I would run into Ron often when I was the EA to the Pacific Fleet Commander. We come through the Pentagon for business, and invariably I would run into Ron. I was like, man, who's giving him our schedule? I'd run into him somewhere in the Pentagon, and we would have some pretty good chats. And he would tell me about what he was doing, and I'm sure he was getting information from me because he is in business development, or he was in business development. And business development, and I'm in business development as well. So business development is you're trying to, you are responsible in certain ways for bringing in business that will grow the company. And it's at its core, that's what business development is. There are a lot of functions associated with business development, and it's a whole life cycle. Everything from the left side of the proposal to where you're working and you're trying to find what are the actual capability gaps, or what's the needs, so you work that in there. And then it's all the way to the other end of the spectrum is building a proposal that's going to win, whatever that requirement is. All of that and everything in between is associated with business development. Ron worked primarily on the left side, and Ron was a type of guy that would provide customer insight. He would be the guy that would let the company know when they're off track. He was the kind of guy that would help provide strategy information. And what we get hired for primarily is that we understand the customer. When you come out of the Navy, I think business development is an area that's an easy transition for most of us, because all those things that I just told you that Ron did and I did, is what they hire you for. They hire you for your customer intimacy. What do you know about the job that you may have left, the community that you may have just left, and the Navy writ large? And that's what they're paying you for, is your knowledge and your ability to get folks into the door, particularly those with profit and loss responsibility and that are developing these capabilities for the company to get in to better understand the customer's needs and to answer customer questions and satisfaction. Yes.
We have a question in chat, and I wanted to raise it since you're talking about it. The question is, after having served, this is from the panelists, after having served in both business development and profit and loss, which do you think is the better path to pursue first? Which is most difficult?
So that's a good question. And I'm going to broaden that a little bit, if you don't mind, because I looked at a lot of different things. I looked at aerospace and defense. I looked at academia. I also looked at government service. So that's a kind of taking it up a little bit. I think it depends on what you want to do. I'll tell you this much: there is a lot more stress. There's a lot more pressure when you work for a business unit that's responsible for profit and loss. You have certain targets that you have to hit for growth. You have a win-loss percentage for those proposals that I was talking about that you'll be held accountable for. The CEO or the VP of that product line may even impose an artificial number for growth, a go-get number that he'll put on you as a business owner. So it kind of depends. And I'll say this much too: business development. So, you know, I told you I looked at those 3 different paths, and there are more that are out there, but by far, business development is the most lucrative path. Whether you're in working for a BU with P&L responsibility, a business unit, or whether you are overhead, like I was at Raytheon and Ron was at Raytheon. I'll tell you this much: if you want a good balance, you know, of family and other activities and work, then working overhead, which is what I did, what I started off with, and you know, Ron, is a lot, affords you more opportunity to do that. Here, and it also depends on the size of the company. Now, remember, Raytheon was one of these top 6, you know, aerospace and defense companies. So there are a lot of other people that specialize in certain things that so you can kind of focus on the main thing and not have to worry about a lot of collateral things. You go to a smaller company, like I am today. You know, you mentioned 3 hats that I wear. I wear more than that. I got trade shows, I've got comms, I've got I've got VIPs coming through on the main guy. I mean, it's like being back in a squadron again and being a department head. Or I mean, you've got a lot of, your title may say this, but you got this much on your plate and collateral duties that you have to take care of. Being in a BU where you've got profit and, you know, your VP has profit and loss responsibilities and you contribute to that, you're graded on that, your bonus is based on that, has a lot more stress associated with it, but it's fun. I'll give you an example of something that you should probably think about. When you transition, if you're going to go into aerospace and defense, you know, business development is probably the most, you know, the easiest transition. But you can do more. You get your foot in the door, and then you can start looking around and seeing if there are some other things you want to do. Strategy could be one. Program management could be something else. Operations, you know, where it's not necessarily profit and loss, but is producing whatever the product is and maintaining. It's like being I was a maintenance officer in the squadron. It's like keeping the trains moving, and you're producing whatever that widget is on a schedule. The current president and CEO of the company that I work for, he followed the path of being doing what Ron and I did. Then he went over to program management. Then he went over to operations. Then he went over to general management, where he had P&L responsibilities. And now he is the CEO and president of Spartan. And oh, by the way, he was a classmate. He was a war college classmate of mine. So you can see that, you know, it depends on what you want to do. That's the one piece of advice that I would kind of leave you with is, hey, what do you want to do? Now, my mentor and good friend Ron Evans says his philosophy is, you've had a career when you were in the military. You know, you had a great career, and you strive to be all you can be and the best that you could be. You got all kind of accolades, awards, promotions, all of that stuff based on your hard work. When you move over to phase two is all about doing those things and earning as much as you can so that you can move on to phase three. Phase three is the phase to where if you want, you just do whatever you want to do. If that's travel, you've got enough money to for your standard of living, and you can travel as much as you want to. If you want to volunteer, then you can go volunteer and not have to worry about your standard of living. But his focus is, hey, phase two is not a career, it's a job, right? So you find that balance to where, whatever makes you happy, that's probably where you want to be. And, you don't have to be too ambitious in that phase. But your whole purpose in life in that phase two is to earn as much as you can so that you can move on to phase three, and earn as much as you can on the timeline that you have set for yourself. You and your financial advisor have set for yourself so that you can meet that timeline and then move on to phase three. Now, I take my view is a little bit different. And Ron may have the same view because he's primarily talking to those of us that were retiring. But I think that you need to decide what you want to do in phase two. Are you going to have that nice work-life balance, or are you going to be as ambitious as you were in phase one and you want to run a company? Or you want to be a very senior executive in one of the larger companies? If that's your goal, then you should plan and you should make it known. I have a gentleman that works for me now who wants to do that. And he's made it clear. And I'm like, hey, I don't expect for you to work for me for more than a couple of years, because you need to be moving on to program management, operations, or whatever. And you've got a good mentor there in the front office because he did that. Go talk to him. So I think you probably want to think about, particularly if you go in aerospace and defense, business development is the nice kind of transition for you, and it buys you some time. But you should think about, how hard do you want to work, or how ambitious you want to be there in phase two. So I hope that answers the question. Okay. Let's see here. So I transitioned over to Raytheon. I joined, and it was I told you I'm lucky. I joined there, and it was a wardroom, right? It was all retired, mostly retired 06s from the different services. I was on the Army and Navy team. And oh, by the way, my friend and mentor Ron Evans was the guy that facilitated me joining Raytheon. I told Steve Evans I was going to be there for 3 years. About 6 months in, Ron Evans came to me and said, "Hey, I'm retiring, and I think you would be a good guy to compete for my job." I said, "Well, when are you retiring?" He said, "I'm retiring in 6 months." I said, "Wait a minute. I just told Steve I was going to be here for 3 years." He said, "Hey, I told you I'm retiring in 6 months." I said, "Okay." He said, "You'll be fine." It's like, I can't just walk away after I've given my word. And so I called on another mentor, Andy Wins, and I was like, "Hey, I just told Steve I was going to be here for 3 years. I'm 6 months in. Ron's retiring in 6 months, so I need to put in my, I need to request retirement like now. How do how should I play that?" And Andy said, "Steve will understand. Just let him know." And he was right. So I thought what I thought was going to be a tough conversation ended up being a very easy conversation. Retired 6 months later, went through a series of interviews. And oh, by the way, the hiring official, or the guy with hiring authority, was Vice Admiral Bruce Grooms, and his boss was Rick Hunt. So again, you can see where relationships matter, right? And so best I think the best opportunity for me. I moved in there. It was like being in a joint war room. Worked on the the Navy Marine Corps team, and I inherited. Again, we were overhead, right? So we didn't have hard targets that we had to hit. We were in a support team role, and part of my portfolio, the largest part of my portfolio, was guns and missiles, on ships. So I was working with the missiles business unit, primarily there in Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. And so I know a little bit about some of the guns, surface missiles, surface guns, and all that other stuff, but not like to the level that I needed to know. So it was almost like being a JO again, digging into the books, talking to people, understanding the capability, and then, understanding where the capability gaps were, understanding what the BU goals were, because again, those guys have hard targets that they were going after, and supporting them in the best way that I could. So that was a perfect situation for me. Enjoyed it very much. But in that job for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years or so, it was announced that we were going to merge with United Technology. And a disruptor was brought in to prepare for that merger. And this is not uncommon with a lot of organizations. We just went through a merger or an acquisition here with the company I'm currently in. But in this particular case with Raytheon, this disruptor was brought in, and a lot of folks were in functional areas were let go, and it wasn't based on performance. They were invited off the island. I think as they looked for potential savings or synergies, as they call it in the business world, they look for opportunities to make room for, if you have duplicate positions in the two companies, for whoever they wanted in those positions, or you just simply eliminate that functional area. So there was a lot of that going on, and the culture changed, and I didn't like some of the heavy-handedness leadership, which was a lot different than what I had experienced in the Navy. Many of us were getting a little bit disenchanted, so I started looking for other opportunities. And that's where I interviewed. So I interviewed for the job there at the University of Maryland, which would have been about a third of the pay that I was making there at Raytheon, but it seemed like a pretty good lifestyle. I mean, with academia, and I was familiar with that. It was a military affairs, something like that. I also interviewed for a GS-14 job out in San Antonio with an Air Force ISR wing out there. And that seemed like a pretty good, it was a deputy chief of staff job. That seemed like a pretty good fit until I started interviewing, and it seemed like, it was an ill-defined position, but it would have been a pretty good work-life balance position. And it was out in San Antonio, where my good friend and mentor, Ron Evans, wanted me to live. And we had looked at Texas as a final, phase 3 location. We had looked at several locations, including Florida, Tennessee. Wife wanted to stay someplace warm. And so that would have worked out great. So I was looking, and by chance, I told you I'm fairly lucky. I get a phone call, a cold call out of the blue from Spartan. I didn't know what Spartan was. The recruiter told me exactly what they did, sonar buoys, and what they were looking for. They were looking for a served P3 Commodore with business development experience. And so I was like, wow, that's me. And there are a bunch of us here, but none of these guys are gonna leave DC. So I knew I was in a pretty good position. But they went silent on the net for a couple of months. And I was really trying to figure out if I was going to stay with Raytheon or step off without really having a job or not. You can kind of see the writing on the wall with the the way they were eliminating positions and letting people go. Fortunately, again, luck worked in. I got the phone call, and they made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And the offer was to be the VP for business development. And my assumption was that it was going to be similar to the job that I was in, but it was, it's completely different. And it goes back to my answer to that question. I go from one of the top 6 aerospace and defense companies to a mid-tier aerospace and defense company that's not even in the top 500. And I get down there, and the life of luxury that I was living with the family time that I enjoyed while I was in DC vanished fairly quickly, because I started wearing a bunch of hats. And the first thing that I had to do was to build a strategic 5-year plan, something that I contributed to when I was at Raytheon, but never built one. But there was an expectation that business development was going to do that. I inherited comms, I was doing press releases, marketing, trade shows, and proposals. That company was not very, they didn't have a process for going through a typical business development proposal cycle. So I had to break out the books and implement that while I was there. A lot of fun, but again, those were Navy kind of. I was back in the Pentagon again, or back in Pac Fleet as an EA with the hours and the stress, but all good. Enjoying it. It's not exactly what I would have preferred to do at this stage in phase 2, but it's still a lot of fun, and I'm still enjoying it. I can answer any questions about any of those facets of my job. What I will say is that some key points for me as I was making it through the transition, and so as I went through the first transition, I leaned on many of the mentors that I had as I went through my compensation discussions. And it's not your salary discussion. It's a compensation. It's the whole picture, the stuff that they tell you in these transition courses, and it's the way you negotiate. It's kind of the subtle words that you use. And it's understanding where your target is, but having a little bit of science behind how you get to your target. I got through that by talking through, a lot of my mentors were seniors, but the mentors at my level who had already transitioned were very good at telling me, hey, this is where you want to be starting off in that job. This is the in total compensation package. So that was very helpful for me. And it's a different compensation level for your high cost of living areas in DC, like DC, than it is for someplace like Florida. It's a completely different ballgame. And I had the same benefit as I was working through my compensation discussions here for my current job. And this is where I really leaned on my senior mentors who had gone through, similar jobs or in similar positions, albeit in larger companies, of how to kind of go through that process. And that was very helpful. So one lesson learned is, it's typical to the other lessons learned. Use those relationships, use your mentors at every level, as you work through the compensation. Let's see. Another lesson that I learned is that when I found out that they were interested in me at this for the job that I'm currently in, I found out who the CEO was at the time. He was a retired submariner who's a little bit behind Cecil Haney, close to Bruce Grooms, and a little bit ahead of Frank Caldwell and Robert. Hey, I have a list of a reference list that I include with my resume. And I made sure that those names were at the top of my reference list when I sent it in, when they asked me for my resume. And so when I got a phone call to meet with the CEO for the final interview, it wasn't an interview. He was asking me about all those names that he had reached out to or that had reached out to him, and about my impression of those folks. And it was telling C stories. It was so that, the interview was pro forma. He had already made up his mind based on his conversations and his interactions with my mentors that was on that reference list. So that's another lesson that I learned. Relationships matter. I'm sorry, is that a question?
Yeah, yes, sir. Biscuit here. So we got a question in the chat. And so one of the things that you talked about was this transitioning from phase 1 to phase 2. Can you kind of elaborate in a little more detail, your terminal leave, did you take advantage of that, or did you were you working 2 jobs before you left the service? I think that's the question that she's getting to. And just for the benefit of the group, talk to with a little bit of specificity those final days. And if you want, you can elaborate, like you touched on, as you left Raytheon to Spartan. Over.
Okay, sure. So I think there's 2 questions. One was the transition from the military to Raytheon, and then elaborate on the transition from Raytheon to Spartan. I did take terminal leave. I had built up quite a bit, actually. I think close to 3 months or so. Like I said, the last few jobs that I had in the Navy didn't afford a whole lot of opportunity for time off. So I built up quite a bit of leave, and I was prepared to work while I was on terminal leave. Any of these aerospace and defense jobs, you have to, there's a paperwork that you fill out that makes sure that you're not overlapping with certain types of work. Excuse me 1 second. So you fill out paperwork with the whole purpose of ensuring that you are not engaging in certain activities that are not allowed for that company. And depending on your previous jobs, you may not be able to fully participate into certain activities that the company engages in. If you were in acquisitions, there's rules that you can't engage in certain activities that are associated with your particular area of expertise. The more senior you get, the more restrictive those requirements are. But you can work. You can go, in some cases, retired officers are hired with the understanding that they may not be able to engage in certain activities or with certain people over a specific period of time. But if they want you, they're going to hire you, and they'll find other work for you to do. In my particular case, I had gone through several interviews, and I was prepared to work while I was on terminal leave, but the process took long. I mean, it took months. I think it was like 3 or 4 months before I was actually hired. I knew that they were going to hire me, but it just took a while. And I think it's the nature. And oh, by the way, that wasn't, hopefully it's improved, but I think that was kind of the standard in the industry, because I talked to other guys who had gone to other companies, and they talked about the lengthy hiring process. But I was prepared, and I think they were prepared to hire me while I was on a terminal leave. I interviewed fairly quickly. I think I interviewed, and my first interview was in January. I think Ron retired that same month. Then I interviewed a couple of interviews after that, then it was a month later, another interview. And then, so it was a series of, I think in total, there were like 6 interviews. It just took a while to get through all of the interviews and to get through the entire process. But once they decided to hire, then that hiring was driven by their onboarding dates, and the onboarding dates kind of coincide with payment cycles. So for me, once I was hired, it was like, hey, hurry, hurry, hurry. It's like, now we want you, you're hired, sign the contract, 2 weeks, we need you to be in the onboarding class. And there was a whole bunch of things that needed to occur in between that. But so that's, that hopefully that answers the question about the transition between the military and that job. Does that answer the question? I'll take that.
Yeah, I think the idea was, the amount of time that you spent between like your last day in uniform, terminal leave, and then starting your next job. And it sounded like, you, because of how you left, essentially you submitted your retirement papers, and while you were interviewing, you're still on active duty, right? You weren't on terminal leave.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so did you have any point in time where, how much terminal leave did you end up using? All 3 months?
Oh, I use it all. This was like 100 days. I used it all.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that was for me. So a buddy of mine, just retired, acquisition guy, just retired, acquisition 06. And a week after he retired, he was working. So it just depends on the, so, and it's a big company. It's one of the top 8 companies as well. So hopefully that hiring process has changed some. So no doubt he's working while he's on terminal leave. And the second question was my transition in between the 2 jobs. That was a little bit odd. And the reason that I say it was odd is because I didn't have, my direct report had left the company and taken another job. And so I didn't have a direct report. We thought we were going to get a direct report much sooner than we did. And I was being pressured by Spartan to show up like last month. So I negotiated with them to allow me 3 weeks. And the new guy shows up, new direct report shows up, and I give him notice, but I wanted to take a week, to get acclimated to the new location. So I ended up giving a week notice, which is not the industry standard. The industry standard is about 2 weeks. That's so I gave about a week's notice, and I tried to push back my report date with Spartan, but Spartan they were pretty hard on the report date. So the new guy shows up, and the first thing he's got to do is go tell his bosses that, he's losing one of his people. So there was a little bit of pressure from on high for me to stay a little bit longer. I had, made up my mind that I was going to leave. I was willing to stay another week or so, only if the company that was hiring me was agreeable to that. I could not negotiate them to extend my report date. So I ended up giving them a week's notice. And I think, I did it in the most professional way that I could. Had some discussions with my boss's boss. explained to her, what was going on, and even said I'd go back and try to renegotiate. So all in all, it was a tough conversation, few tough conversations. But I think I left there in good state. You never want to burn any bridges. I think I left there in good stead, and I think it worked out. That transition was fairly easy leaving the company. It was interesting coming into, leaving a company that has a lot of folks that specialize in certain things, pay within HR, hiring, onboarding, et cetera, to going to a company where you have one or two people that's doing everything. So there were some things that were dropped when I showed up for. So that's another lesson learned, is that you got to really stay on, you got to recage your expectations when you go from a larger company to a mid-tier company. I've already talked about, the workload, but also is the support that you receive too. A lot, I had to stay on top of them for a lot of the benefits, and had to produce. I don't know why they didn't have copies, but I had to produce copies of my contract and certain things that were afforded me in my contract in order to get those benefits. So I see there's another company. I'm at another question.
Yeah, so question is, there don't seem to be many African Americans in significant leadership positions in defense. How can those that are currently in some of those positions help some of the aspiring business execs?
That's a great question. I struggle with bringing in, first of all, you got to get your foot in the door. And I have hiring authority, and I struggle with bringing in diverse talent, Black, female. I struggle with bringing those folks in. And I have gone out and actively recruited. In fact, I have two positions that are open. One of them is on the NNOA website for business development manager. And, I really need, you can read the position description. It'll talk about capture. Capture is that other side of the spectrum that I was talking about, because we do that too, right? So you got to do all of those activities. That's going to take an opportunity to a proposal and take it all the way through to where you're going to submit that proposal, a winning proposal. So I would like to have that talent, but I'm willing to bring in people that, that don't necessarily have that in their kit bag, and I can train you to that. I would like to have more someone who has the desire and the energy to learn the business and to learn that aspect of it, to not just having the customer insight piece, but to learn the rest of that business development cycle. And I've gone out and tried to recruit folks to do that. So I think the first thing that me and guys like me can do is to try to get people in the door. The second thing is to continue to mentor, to make sure that they're doing those things like my current CEO. And oh, by the way, the previous CEO did the same thing. He was a guy that came in under business development and then went through those other functional areas, eventually getting to profit and loss responsibility, which afforded him the opportunity to be looked at seriously as a serious candidate for a CEO position. So it's the mentorship that I think me and guys like me owe folks who are in positions to do that, to get to that position.
All right, thank you. And we got one more question, and I'll have a question to close it out. But what advice can you offer women transitioning with lesser opportunities, specifically, not having connection to flags, Naval Academy, et cetera, to facilitate this process?
So I think this organization and this forum is very helpful. As I stated earlier, I have hiring authority. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to others like me who have hiring authority. And I'm sure there are probably others that have been on this, in this forum. They're just on the website here. I've posted one job and I'm getting ready to post another job. So I think that that's exactly the purpose of NNOA, is to connect diverse officers with folks like me and others, and not just in my industry, but in other industries, who can help, who can provide advice, and who may even be able to get your name in the door. And that was one of the main points. I talked about relationships. That's the main thing. You can apply for a job, look at the position description. You may hit one or two, three or four of the different factors that's on that position description. But if you can get it to someone within that organization who has hiring authority, they can at least get you an interview. They can get you in the door. I'll tell you, that's how I hired the last guy. He was recommended to me by a friend of mine. He didn't have that right side of that spectrum, but he had a whole lot of energy and he had a proven track record in the Navy. And he zoomed through those series of interviews, did well. And I said, I'm going to take a chance on him, because I got a friend of mine told me that he's the type of guy that you can take a chance on. Same thing for other diverse candidates. We've got to do more of that. And I want to do more of that. I've tried to do that, on my recent hires, and it's a challenge because a lot of people don't want to move. But if you're willing to move and you understand that, being in a smaller company like ours, you're going to be a utility guy or gal, and you want that challenge, then there are probably a lot more like me that's willing to mentor you and help you with that.
All right, sir. So I want to thank you for taking the time, and I'll give you the last word, but I have the last question. So
Okay.
how are you doing on your transition from phase 2 to phase 3?
So I've got about 2 more years. Actually, I'm ready for phase 2 now. I've hit my my financial goals. There is a couple of things that I want to do before I actually transition. You mentioned that we provide sonobuoys to the Navy and to international partners. We do that as a joint venture. So there are 2 companies do that. We're sole source. That joint venture is breaking up. So starting next year, we're in full-blown competition, and I want to win that competition. And so that competition is going to run for a year or 2. So that right there gets my my blood, warm in the morning, and that's what my main goal here is, to make sure that we win that competition.
Awesome. Well, Captain Wyatt, thank you very much for taking the time this evening to share your story. And, to all the members, the panelists, as well as the attendees, hopefully you got something out of this fireside chat. As a reminder, the group is active, and a lot of the questions don't have to end here. Like you said, we can follow up and get you connected with at least somebody who can then get you connected with either the right industry or answer your questions. So I want to leave you with the last word, and before we sign off, but I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Biscuit, and thank you for the opportunity. I believe in NNOA. I also believe in personal mentorship, I am available. I think you have my information. If you don't, I'll make sure that I send it out there. Don't hesitate to reach out to me for questions, for advice. And if you're interested in a job, I've got a business development job open. I've got a marketing job that's open. Or, the other thing is you may not be able to, I may not be able to help you directly, but I just hired this guy based on the suggestion that someone else gave me. I could probably do something similar to that because there is a Bubba net amongst us, at least from my community, where we communicate quite frequently, and we don't share trade secrets. But when there's a job opening, that goes up on that Bubba net, and that Bubba net is like, hey, I'm looking for someone with a certain flavor, and I might be able to push some of that information out. Be happy to push some of that information out for those that are interested in getting into this industry. But with that, I'll say thank you again for the opportunity. It's been enjoyable for me. Hopefully, it wasn't too boring, and I shared some of my lessons learned were valuable to you. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions or if you need anything. Thank you.